huge lead for Chikurin to close out the tournament, to close out the tour.
Uh-oh, Ulsan, don't let him do it. Don't let him do it. Backdash the wild standing
And that'll do it. Chikurin is your Tekken World Tour Finals champion.
Japan reclaiming glory in the Tekken World Tour. It's been since 2015 that a Japanese competitor has won either at EVO or at TWT, and Chikurin finally, and you could see how much it meant to the community at the end, right? Where it was the fan base, the players jumped on stage and were throwing him in the air. It was a party atmosphere. Just talk about the importance of Chikurin winning this one.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a game that has been dominated the last few years by South Koreans, whether that be NIE or JDCR. I think that generally this game has not been something that the Japanese players have dominated in for quite some time, as you mentioned, and that is something that I think it does mean a lot. It's very interesting to see how sort of nationalistic in a way that Tekken has become. Obviously, Pakistan has a huge sort of representation. There were 3 Pakistani players at the Tekken World Tour Finals this weekend. Arslan Ash had his breakout year. We'll talk about him in a little bit. And then also, the South Korean players have had a really good streak prior to that as well. So I think that seeing a Japanese player win again, it definitely means something, and I think that it's good to see it. And it was a good win. It was a good win. He had a really hard bracket. So
and also a really impressive final where he brought out Akuma, which I thought was very interesting. Hadn't used Akuma all tournament, but many of the players going into TWT were scrimming Akuma because of the Pakistan contingent, so well versed in Akuma. So I found it interesting that was in Chikurin's back pocket to just bust out Akuma like that when all the other players were almost like Ulsan as well in the final representing South Korea. Like, you would have assumed that Ulsan would be ready for Akuma after having practiced and scrimmed Akuma. Right. So it could have been risky, like high risk, high reward in this situation for Chikurin to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that we don't see played a ton in Tekken as of late. As you mentioned, though, like the interesting thing about Tekken to me throughout this year has been that because of things like visa issues and various other things, you don't get to see these set of players together as super frequently. There are a couple times, big times throughout the year, EVO Japan, others, right? So it's really interesting to sort of see when they all get together, those sort of the matchups and the mind games between one another, because particularly the Pakistani players don't get to play as much, and so you don't get to see some of those strategies. And so I think that generally, looking at this, it was an interesting weekend for Tekken, and certainly some surprising results. Not just the win, but also Arslan Ash was eliminated in groups. That was an incredibly difficult group with Ulsan and with NIE in the same group as Arslan Ash.
Am I correct in saying that NIE chose that group?
I believe that's correct.
Like NIE said, I want to be in this group, almost as if to say, I want to face Arslan Ash early.
Yeah, I mean, they have been the rivalry of Tekken the entire year, and sort of the one to watch, whether that be at EVO, either EVO, and throughout the year playing one another. And so, I mean, I guess NIE just wanted to get it over with, and he did, and he won, which I don't think would have been the predicted result. But I guess if you're going to take it, you may as well take it early.
So let's talk about the Pakistan contingent. You mentioned the 3 competitors, including the last chance qualifier winner Bilal, that made it to groups. None of them made it out of groups. I believe only 5 victories among the 3 competitors, Arslan Ash, Awais Honey, and Bilal. My first question is, I still believe Arslan Ash is the clear esports player of the year across any title, despite this result. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I got to sit down and spend about an hour and a half with him at EVO this year, and I think his story is incredible. I think that a lot of people don't really understand. At the beginning of the year, he's told Kenny Omega, one of our producers, that he didn't think he was the best player in Tekken in Pakistan. And he may be right. We have seen throughout the year as more countries have let some of these players in and had less visa restrictions like the U.S. Has. You have seen more of these Pakistani players compete at tournaments and do very, very well. When tournaments come to the Middle East and to South Asia, that has also been the case. The Pakistani players have showed up and played really well outside of their own community. And so I think that looking at this, he was the first one to show that was the case. He spoke out, he was vocal about his community and the great Pakistani contingency that exists for Tekken in that country. And then also his story of what he overcame is just incredible. He traveled for, I think he said more than 2 days for EVO Japan.
Yeah.
And then
multiple
won.
flight changes
Right.
and delays.
He had
yeah.
issues. He had issues where he was on multiple airlines, and therefore he had visa issues because you have to be on the same itinerary throughout the way. He got stuck. At one point, he said that people couldn't take his or wouldn't take his money because he had Pakistani currency and not where he was traveling to and traveling through to get to Japan. He ends up winning Evo Japan. He becomes the only person to win both Evo Japan and Evo America in the same year. His Evo America victory was incredible. You know, obviously the moment of him falling down and praying on stage was like this iconic photographic
Photo
moment.
of the year, probably, right?
Yeah,
One of them.
fantastic. I certainly agree with that. And then also, like, when he sat down with us after that and talked about sort of how it was difficult with the travel. Obviously, his visa to the U.S. only allowed one entry, so he was in Las Vegas for like a week and a half period. He played one tournament before then played Evo, won Evo, and then went back home. He was only allowed the one entry for the year, right? Pakistan's one of, I think it's in the bottom 5 of the passport rankings, and so
Right.
it's really difficult to get a visa like that. He was lucky to have the one grant he did. And he made the most of it, but he said he was playing on an upset stomach because he was having to,
Right.
he was sticking to Islamic dietary rules, and it was really difficult to eat for a week and a half in America and compete. And so like he said that he, like, between being nervous and between not being able to eat is sort of in his comfort. It was a difficult time for him in America, and he still won Evo. And I have nothing but respect for the guy, and his stardom has risen significantly. If you look at it this time last year, I think he had played like 3 or 4 international tournaments,
Right.
and most of them were in the Middle East, and some of them were in Asia.
Yeah.
And now you look at it where he is now, even though he didn't do great at the Tekken World Tour, he did fantastic at Evo Japan and Evo, and he has an incredible story.
And that first international tournament was crowdfunded by his friends and family and the Tekken community in Pakistan because he didn't have the money to go. And
Yeah.
like going back,
Now he's a Red Bull athlete. So I
now
don't
he's
think
a
that's
Red Bull
problem.
athlete, but he's the first one from Pakistan to achieve that
Yep.
as well. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think for those reasons, he certainly is the clear favorite, at least among the two of us, for
I agree.
Esports Player of the Year. The other, I do want to mention, I know you're chasing this story. I know that this is a continuous story that you're following with Arslan Ash. The dietary restrictions can be very severe the more devout you are as a Muslim, right? It's not just necessarily eating halal meat. It's no pork, etc. There's a lot of restrictions that he is following, and in the places that he's traveling, it's not often that easy to find that kind of food, and he's not able to bring it with him. So oftentimes he's competing with a bad stomach or an empty stomach, not optimal competing conditions on stage.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean,
Just want to make that point, yeah.
It's something that, like, I admire his commitment. It's
Yeah.
it's something that's respectful. He said something to the effect of, "I am nothing without my faith," when we interviewed him at Evo this year,
Yeah.
and it is a very important part of his being, and that's very admirable.
So we talked about the year as a whole, but now let's focus on the Tekken World Tour results, because it wasn't the best day for Pakistan. Now, what it seems like, especially when you use me as an example, traveling to Pakistan, getting some reps in against the Pakistan community, now I wonder where we are in terms of how the rest of the field has figured out Pakistan's approach and what will happen in 2020, particularly for the Pakistani players. Is it a situation where we know now the element of surprise is gone?
Correct. Yeah.
So now I wonder, does this community, do the top players, the Arslan Ash, the Oasis Honeys, how will they adapt? How will they practice and scrim and strategize such that they continue to get top results moving into 2020?
Well, we definitely need to see what the schedule looks like for 2020, right? If there are more Southeast Asian events that they can go to, I think that inherently is a lot easier from an immigration and visa perspective to go to Southeast Asia than it is to come to America. Again, we just said a lot of the best players in Tekken are from South Korea, Japan, and Pakistan. So, and I think that I would not be surprised to see some of the Asian players also go to Pakistan and boot camp with the Pakistani players as well. There were some tournaments in the various Middle Eastern countries, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, so I would expect to see more of those probably in 2020. I think that people were just generally surprised that there was a giant Tekken community in Pakistan to this level, right? Like there were definitely people in the scene, around the scene, on an international scale that were from Pakistan that were notable in Tekken, but to see that it is deep as it is with competitors, I think it is becoming a destination hub. And it's something that I could see these top players in Pakistan, Arslan Ash and the others, kind of competing and boot camping one another, and this becoming a national pride thing. They make each other better to beat the other countries.
I want to talk about knee in just a second, but let's talk about a country we haven't spoken about yet, where we live, the United States. Anakin, great tournament, highest placement for him in the Tekken World Tour Finals, came third in EVO this year. A great year overall, placement-wise and prize money-wise for Anakin, and he made a lot of adjustments away from the game, right? Stress, dealing, meditation, mental preparation, those kind of things. What does 2020 have in store, in your opinion, for a competitor like Anakin?
He's been one of the best players in this game historically for quite some time. Certainly the best American player when you look at the field of people that compete in the top level tournaments. I think moving forward for him, I'm interested to see sort of what his preparation looks like, right? We've seen someone like Snake Eyes before travel to Japan and get the reps in. Maybe he does more boot camping elsewhere, right? I think that Tekken, as it evolves, I think this was a great year for the game in general. That everything rose up, the viewership rose up, interest in the scene rose up, good stories were there, right? The Arslan Ash story, Arslan Ash versus Knee, which is kind of separate to the Arslan Ash story, and sort of seeing people like Anakin who have been here a while and doing this for a while. I think that it's kind of the rising tides float all boats situation, and he will be one of those people that rises up in this sort of wake. So I think for him, I'm really interested to sort of see how he takes that preparation to the next step. But I don't see him going away. I think he will continue to be one of the top competitors in the game. Certainly does very well for himself here in America. Yeah. And I'm curious to see what sort of sky miles he gets in 2020 and where he goes.
I'm curious to see where Knee goes as well. He traveled a lot, went to Pakistan like we mentioned in 2019. Always somebody who's at the top of the charts. Always somebody who people predict will be a favorite in a tournament. Didn't win a ultra top tier tournament this year. Won a few T1 tournaments.
Came in second at a lot of them.
He came in second in a lot of them. But I wonder, he's somebody who has exhibited, actions speak louder than words, somebody who's always striving to improve. We see this by him traveling places and just constantly putting time in the game.
Very seriously. You can just tell by the way that he sits on a stage and the way that he's just mentally focused. And when he loses, he's drained, right? Like, he's not incredibly emotional, but it's certainly, you can tell just by his facial expressions how serious this is for him.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because I wonder what he's thinking going into 2020. He looks back on 2019 and said, yeah, I had some good results. I had some good placements, but I didn't win EVO. I won EVO Japan in 2018. I didn't win EVO this year. I didn't win TWT. What do I need to do? And what is my mindset going into 2020 in order to get back to that top of the mountain, at least for myself?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to. He's always going to be a threat at every single tournament. I think for him, it's using that as motivation, right? You could look at it from the perspective of I didn't do well enough and be hard on yourself, or you could look at it as I came really close multiple times. As the year progressed, I got better, even though the results don't show that. I mean, he beat Arslan Ash to eliminate him in this group stage. And I think that generally looking at that, that's a win, because he struggled with Arslan throughout the year. They were sort of the butt-head rivals throughout the years. And I think when you look at his motivation, if I am in his position, I certainly kind of buckle down, right? You've got a lot of opportunity to play people. EVO Japan's not that far away from right now, so focus on that. Get your reps in. Take a little bit of time probably to breathe after Tekken World Tour. But again, if I were in his position, I would not see it as a fault, because he came really close multiple times. And I think that certainly 2020 could be a big year for him. The missing piece, I think he's figuring it out. So, and I think the competitor he probably worried about this weekend was Arslan Ash, not the others. Now it's time to focus on the others, because everybody else is getting better too.
Right. Well, the next big event in the FGC, of course, will be the Capcom Cup. And breaking news, ESPN ESPORTS will be the official pre-show live from the Novo, LA Live, Los Angeles, California. Jacob and I will actually be on site. We will have Sajam with us. We will have other guests with us. And by the way, leading up to it, Daniel Collette and Sajam did a whole lot of preview content. All those videos will be up at youtube.com/ESPN ESPORTS. Getting you set for the Capcom Cup. We will be live on Saturday and on Sunday, twitch.tv/ESPN ESPORTS.